My name is Riley Hartman. I'm 30 years old, and I've spent the last 2 years walking on crutches after a wreck that nearly shattered my spine. I make my living as a crime investigator for the Denver Chronicle. Someone trained to read lies the way most people read headlines. Yet nothing in my career prepared me for the moment my own sister tried to humiliate me in front of our entire family. It happened in my parents' backyard on a warm afternoon that should have been peaceful but twisted into something far darker. I was crossing the lawn, steadying myself on the soft grass, when I felt a sudden jerk that tore the balance out from under me. My sister Madison had yanked my crutch mid-step with a speed and force that felt intentional, almost practiced, and I crashed against the ground in a burst of pain that stole the breath from my lungs. The sound of laughter rose before I could even lift my head. The kind of laughter people reserve for a spectacle, not a human being. Phones were pointed at me from every direction as if my fall were entertainment instead of agony. I pushed myself up on one elbow, tasting earth and humiliation, and heard Madison's voice float through the air with that sharp, rehearsed tone she used when she wanted an audience. She claimed I was faking my disability for sympathy and handouts, her words slicing through the yard like they were facts instead of the cruel fiction she needed them to be. My mother looked away as if avoiding my eyes might erase the scene unfolding, while my father kept tending the grill without a single glance in my direction. In that moment, their silence hurt more than the impact on the ground. I stared at the cameras trained on me, feeling the familiar ache in my back pulse like a warning. When a shadow fell across the crowd, a figure stepped forward with the calm certainty of someone who understood exactly what he was walking into. It was Dr. Alan Mercer, my father's longtime friend and the physician overseeing my spinal recovery. And he had seen enough. His arrival didn't just interrupt the laughter, it carved straight through it and left the entire yard frozen in place. Dr. Alan Mercer stood at the edge of the crowd with a certainty that pulled every pair of eyes toward him. I watched the color drain from Madison's face as he announced that my injury was real and that he could prove it beyond doubt. His voice didn't rise, yet it carried through the yard like a verdict. None of them were prepared to hear. The laughter collapsed into a stunned silence that felt heavier than the heat of the afternoon. He held up his phone and played footage from my most recent therapy session, showing me trembling through each step while gripping my crutches with white knuckles. The strain on my face was raw and unfiltered, captured under the stark clinic lights with no room left for interpretation. I saw relatives shift their weight, embarrassed by their own certainty that I had been pretending. Even Madison, usually quick to defend herself, looked cornered by evidence she couldn't twist. When the video ended, Dr. Mercer made it clear that my spinal damage was permanent and required ongoing therapy. His words chipped away at the narrative my family had been comfortable believing, leaving them nowhere to hide. I felt a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion as I watched them avoid my eyes. For the first time in years, the truth sat in the open, undeniable and sharp. Jenna moved to my side the moment Dr. Mercer finished speaking, her hand steady on my arm as she helped me regain my balance. She had stayed silent through the confrontation, filming every second with the calm precision of someone who understood exactly how important the footage would become. I leaned on her support as we made our way toward the side gate, stepping through the wall of stunned relatives who had once been so eager to point their cameras at me. Their silence felt like a hollow apology they were too proud to voice. Madison rushed behind us as we reached the driveway, her footsteps uneven and desperate. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat, weighed down by the consequences closing in on her. I listened without turning back, feeling the shape of her guilt but refusing to let it pull me in again. Her reach toward my shoulder hung in the air for a moment before I walked away from her grasp completely. At the hospital, Dr. Mercer checked for new injuries from the fall and confirmed I hadn't worsened my condition. His professionalism stayed steady, but I saw anger flicker in his expression as he examined the bruises on my arm. I felt the familiar ache in my back pulse in warning, reminding me that recovery was never simple. Still, something inside me hardened into resolve as I realized this humiliation could no longer go unanswered. Jenna sat beside me in the exam room, scrolling through the footage she'd captured with a tense focus. The video showed everything clearly. From Madison's accusations to the moment she yanked my crutch with a deliberate motion she couldn't deny. It was more than proof of what she had done. It was proof of what the entire family had chosen to believe about me. I could feel the weight of their betrayal pressing down on my chest. Cold and unyielding. Later that night, I called HarperCollins, a disability rights attorney recommended by Jenna. Harper listened with a measured tone, taking in every detail without interruption. And her questions were sharp enough to cut through the haze of emotions I still carried. She told me plainly that I had grounds for both a harassment claim and a defamation suit, strengthened by the video evidence. Her certainty felt like the first stable ground I had stepped on since the accident. When I agreed to move forward, something inside me clicked into place. A shift that felt both terrifying and necessary. I wasn't seeking revenge for cruelty alone, but justice for the years of doubt that had shadowed every attempt I made to rebuild my life. Harper laid out the steps ahead, each one demanding more resolve than the last. Still, I felt ready in a way I hadn't expected. Later that night, Jenna replayed her video again, this time stopping it at a moment I had overlooked during the chaos. She zoomed in on Madison's phone, showing a notification glowing across the screen just seconds before my crutch was snatched away. The sender's name was partially visible, and what I could see made my stomach tighten with a new kind of dread. It wasn't a random message. It was someone Madison trusted enough to conspire with. That small detail struck me harder than any insult thrown at the barbecue. It meant Madison hadn't acted from impulse alone, but from some deeper motivation that I hadn't yet uncovered. The idea that she had planned this made the entire afternoon feel darker and far more calculated. I realized that the humiliation was never the true intention. It was a distraction. As I watched the freeze frame of her phone screen, a question surfaced with chilling clarity. I needed to know what Madison was trying to hide so desperately that she was willing to destroy my credibility in front of everyone we knew. That question settled into my mind, like a stone dropped into deep water, pulling me into a colder truth. If Madison had schemed this far, then the doorway into the real secrets was only beginning to open. I felt my pulse slow as the implications sank in, the anger inside me sharpening into focus. Madison's cruelty had never been simple jealousy or frustration. As I had once convinced myself to believe, there was a reason she needed to silence me, and a reason she couldn't afford to let me look too closely at the pieces of my own past. As the night closed around us, I understood that this was no longer about a fall at a family party, but about what that fall was meant to prevent. And with that realization, my path became clear. I was done defending myself against lies, and I was ready to uncover the truth underneath them, no matter how deep it ran or who it exposed. The moment Jenna and I froze the frame on Madison's phone, I felt the shift in my chest like a door unlocking in the dark. The notification revealed just enough of a name to jolt something familiar in me, a recognition that carried the bitter taste of old disappointment. I traced the letters slowly, letting the blurred outline settle into clarity. It belonged to Luke Bradley, the man I once trusted before he walked out of my life with excuses that never added up. I spent the next morning doing what years of investigative reporting had trained me to do: follow the trail quietly and without hesitation. Luke had always been careless with digital footprints, and it didn't take long for me to confirm the number matched his current phone. The realization that he was tied to Madison now tightened the knot in my stomach in a way the fall at the barbecue never could. Their connection was a betrayal, layered on top of betrayal, almost too calculated to be coincidence. I dug deeper into their communication patterns, using the same software I once used to track down a corrupt city contractor. What I found was a steady stream of messages between them dating back months. growing more frequent in the weeks leading to the barbecue. The tone of those messages suggested secrecy and urgency, pulling me into a darker line of thinking. It became clear that Madison didn't simply lash out at me during the celebration. She had been preparing for something. When I confronted the timeline more closely, another detail slipped into focus with the weight of unwelcome clarity. The accident that left me injured had occurred around the same period their messages started, though I had never known they were in contact then. The possibility that the two events were connected crawled across my spine with a cold that defied my injury. I had never once questioned that night beyond accepting it as terrible luck. But now the memory felt incomplete, blurred by the trauma. Jenna understood the direction my thoughts were moving, and she insisted we review every detail of the crash. That evening, we sat together with the accident report spread across my coffee table, examining each line the way I used to examine evidence boards in the newsroom. The report noted that footage from a nearby traffic camera was unavailable because of a malfunction during the exact window of my crash. I remembered feeling comforted by the explanation back then. But now it read like an excuse I had been too broken to question. We drove to the intersection where the accident occurred, and the faded skid marks still stained the asphalt near the curb where I had landed. Standing there again, supported by my crutches, sent an ache through my chest that had nothing to do with bones or nerves. I let my eyes follow the line of sight from the camera post to the road, imagining how easily a car could slip into the blind spot. As I looked around, a flash of red caught my attention from the corner of my memory. The kind that surfaces only when you're finally ready to face it. Back at home, I researched the make and model of Madison's car and compared it to what witnesses had vaguely described in the police report. The alignment was unsettling, and the thought of her being anywhere near that intersection on the night I was hit felt like a truth I wasn't prepared for. Still, I knew hesitation wouldn't protect me from what lay ahead. I had to keep following the evidence, even if it threatened to unravel whatever remained of my family ties. The next breakthrough came late at night, when I managed to record a quiet but telling confession from Luke. I hadn't confronted him directly. I had simply guided the conversation toward the past until the guilt in his voice pulled him in deeper. He admitted that Madison had asked him to keep quiet about an incident involving her car, though he claimed he never knew the details fully. Hearing his admission made the air feel heavy, as if the truth carried its own gravitational pull. Armed with this recording, I began to understand why Madison had needed the chaos of the barbecue. Humiliating me publicly wasn't just about spite. It was about building a narrative that could drown out any suspicion I might raise if I ever questioned the accident. Her attempts to paint me as manipulative or dishonest now felt tactical, designed to discredit me before I could speak. The cruelty of it landed deeper than I expected, hollowing something inside me that I hadn't realized. Still hoped for her decency. Meanwhile, the video Jenna posted of the barbecue was spreading rapidly across social media. Within 48 hours, it had been shared thousands of times, drawing outrage from strangers who saw the cruelty for what it was. Comments poured in condemning Madison and the relatives who laughed, and the backlash reached her workplace before she could control it. By midweek, Westline Financial placed her on leave, citing concerns about her conduct and its impact on their image. Aunt Lorraine didn't escape the consequences either, as viewers recognized her voice from the video and criticized her gleeful filming. Clients began withdrawing from her real estate listings, uncomfortable associating with someone so openly disdainful of a disabled family member. Cousin Molly's social media filled with defensive posts, but the more she tried to justify her behavior, the worse the comments became. Watching their carefully curated reputations crack felt less like revenge and more like equilibrium returning. Despite the storm growing around my relatives, I stayed focused on the unanswered questions still circling the accident. Everything in me sensed that the rotten core of this story had yet to be exposed. I could feel myself moving toward it steadily, step by deliberate step, and with each piece of evidence, my resolve sharpened into something unbreakable. Still, one question echoed through me more than any other as the week unfolded. If Madison had gone this far to hide the truth, what else had she been willing to do that I hadn't yet uncovered? The next breakthrough came when a man who lived near the crash site reached out after seeing Jenna's video online. He had recognized my name from the accident reports and said he remembered something unusual from that night. When Jenna and I met him at a small outreach center downtown, he described seeing a red car speeding away from the intersection moments after hearing the impact. His memory was weathered by time, but he recalled part of the license plate clearly enough to make my pulse shift. Back home, I compared the fragment he provided with the registration records for Madison's car. The match wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to make my breath catch in my throat. The implications settled into the silence of my apartment like a weight I couldn't lift. Everything in me resisted the idea that my sister might have been the one behind the wheel that night. Yet every piece of evidence continued pointing in her direction. With the partial plate in hand, I drafted an anonymous message and sent it, along with the recorded confession from Luke, to the corporate ethics office at Westline Financial. The company had a strict policy on undisclosed incidents that could compromise client trust, and I knew a hint of a cover-up would trigger immediate scrutiny. By the end of the week, Madison's temporary leave turned into a sudden termination that made headlines around her office. It was the first piece of her carefully stacked world to collapse under the truth she had spent years hiding. The ripple effect was swift. Colleagues who once admired Madison began distancing themselves. Unwilling to be associated with a scandal that grew uglier each day, invitations vanished. Inboxes emptied. And even her closest work, allies backed away in silence. The moment she lost her job, I sensed the panic tightening around her like a vice. The control she always flaunted was slipping, and she knew exactly who was loosening her grip. Not long after, she showed up at my apartment without warning, looking worn down in a way I had never seen before. Her eyes were wide, almost frantic, as if she had run out of places to hide. The conversation unfolded tense and uneven, marked by her attempts to explain the night of my accident while revealing as little as possible. She admitted being near the intersection but insisted she hadn't caused the crash, repeating the claim so carefully it felt practiced. I listened with a stillness that made her uncomfortable, letting each half-truth hang between us like fog. Something about her tone told me she was trying to get ahead of whatever evidence I might uncover next. When she finally left, the hallway felt strangely lighter, as if her lies had been the real weight pressing against me. I knew then that whatever she had confessed was only the surface of what she feared. Later that evening, Jenna reviewed more of the files on my laptop and stumbled onto something that shifted everything again. She discovered a series of transfers from Madison's account to Luke, spaced out across several months. Each one small enough to avoid attention but consistent enough to reveal a pattern. The timing lined up almost perfectly with the exchanges I had seen in their messages, suggesting she had paid him to stay quiet. The realization tightened my chest with a cold mix of anger and clarity. Seeing those payments made me understand the real reason behind Madison's attack at the barbecue. She hadn't pulled my crutch out of spite alone. She had needed to create a spectacle that would undermine me before I got too close to the truth. If I questioned the accident, she wanted a chorus of relatives ready to dismiss my claims as manipulative or attention-seeking. The cruelty of her plan felt almost methodical, and realizing that broke whatever fragile thread of forgiveness I had once held. Armed with proof of the payments and the recorded confession from Luke, I compiled everything into a detailed packet and sent it directly to the Denver Police Department. I included the original accident report, the witness statement, and the timeline of the concealed messages. By the time I clicked send, my hands were steady in a way they hadn't been for months. I knew this step would no longer be about family conflict, but about accountability enforced by the law. The following day, a local news station picked up the viral video from Jenna's post and requested access to the new evidence circulating on social media. I didn't speak publicly, But someone leaked enough details to spark a citywide conversation. The narrative shifted rapidly from a cruel family moment to the possibility of a long-buried hit and run. Reporters dissected every frame of the footage, analyzing the way my crutch had been pulled and the stunned silence that followed. As the story grew, my parents finally realized the magnitude of what had been happening behind closed doors. My mother called with a voice trembling between fear and denial, while my father stayed silent in the background. Their shock didn't bring me comfort, because it came far too late. After years of looking away when I needed them most, I let their words wash over me without offering reassurance, knowing the truth would continue to unfold whether they accepted it or not. The investigation gained momentum once the police compared the witness's partial license plate with the records I had provided. They located new surveillance footage from a nearby business showing a red car matching Madison's leaving the intersection minutes after my accident. The video was grainy, but the outline of the vehicle was unmistakable. The officers contacted Luke, and within hours, he was in custody for his role in concealing information. Watching everything detach from my hands and move into the system brought a slow, quiet sense of justice. I wasn't acting out of revenge anymore. I was uncovering the full shape of a truth that had been buried under cruelty, secrecy, and manipulation. Each step forward felt like peeling back another layer of the night that nearly ended my life. And with each revelation, Madison's carefully built world crumbled further. Still, I couldn't ignore the lingering question that echoed through me, now sharper than ever. If she had been capable of orchestrating so much, what else had she done that had yet to be uncovered? When the police followed up on the new evidence, the final pieces of the truth surfaced faster than I expected. Investigators retrieved phone records showing that Madison and I had argued minutes before my crash, her calls escalating in length and intensity. They also uncovered location data that placed her car directly behind mine on the highway during the exact window of the accident. The picture that formed was no longer a vague suspicion, but a sequence of choices she had made that ended with me in a hospital bed. The detectives traced the damage on her red sedan to the impact pattern described in my original medical report. Even though she had repaired the vehicle months ago, fragments of the original paint and dents remained in archived photos from a routine inspection at her workplace garage. With this, the story she had tried to construct began collapsing under the weight of real evidence. What she once dismissed as coincidence now stood as a chain of undeniable connections. Denver prosecutors moved quickly once the findings were compiled. They opened a case not only for the harassment and defamation she had inflicted at the barbecue, but also for her involvement in the hit and run that altered the course of my life. Watching the process unfold, I felt a complicated mix of vindication and grief, knowing the truth had always been there, buried beneath the layers she created. Exposing it didn't feel triumphant, it felt necessary. HarperCollins guided me through each step of the legal process with a calm, methodical confidence. During the civil suit, she presented the recordings, the payment records to Luke, the witness account, and the new forensic analysis, with a clarity that left no room for doubt. I sat beside her as the courtroom absorbed the full extent of Madison's choices, each detail landing with the weight of years I had spent trying to rebuild myself. The judge's expression hardened with every piece of evidence, mirroring the disbelief that had once lived inside me. The verdict addressed every thread of damage Madison had caused. She was found liable for the harassment and defamation that followed me from the barbecue, the emotional harm caused by her smear campaign, and the calculated effort to silence me through fear. In the criminal portion, the court ruled there was sufficient evidence tying her to the hit and run, a charge far more serious than she ever imagined facing. I watched her face, pale and hollow, as the consequences she once believed she could outrun closed around her. Aunt Lorraine was fined for her part in publicly humiliating me, her filming deemed harmful and reckless. Cousin Molly and Tyler were reprimanded for offering false statements that contributed to the hostility I endured that day. Luke faced charges of obstruction and fraud for taking money to conceal evidence connected to a crime. Each of them received exactly what their actions warranted. No more and no less. Leaving no loose ends in the aftermath. When I spoke in court, I didn't raise my voice or linger on the pain they caused. I simply said that family stopped being family when they chose cruelty over truth. The courtroom remained silent after my words, as if absorbing the years of injury wrapped inside them. It was not a declaration of anger, but a boundary drawn in stone. One I had waited a long time to finally set. As I left the courthouse that afternoon, the air felt clearer than it had in years. I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking toward a life that no longer belonged to their lies or their doubts. Everything they tried to bury had come to light. And for the first time since the accident, I felt the ground beneath me steady again. After the trial ended, I moved to a quieter part of Colorado where the mountains felt close enough to steady my breathing again. My days became slower and more intentional, built around physical therapy sessions and long stretches of writing at a small desk overlooking a pine-covered ridge. The blog I once started for myself grew into a space where people living with disabilities shared their stories without fear of dismissal. With every post, I felt a little more certain that the life unfolding in front of me belonged entirely to me now. The Denver Disability Alliance later honored my writing with an award I hadn't expected. Recognizing the way the stories resonated with others who had felt unseen, standing on that stage, I wasn't thinking about the accident or the trial, but about the strength it took to speak without shrinking. Jenna celebrated the moment with me, her presence steady in a way family had never been. Together, we built a future that wasn't shaped by the past but informed by the resilience that carried me through it. Madison began serving her sentence, and my parents eventually drifted into a silence that felt more like an ending than a separation. I didn't chase closure because I no longer needed it. I chose myself, and that choice saved me.